Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky stood before the United Nations General Assembly, his voice echoing through the chamber. He urged the international community to stand with Ukraine. Russia's invasion, he declared, violated the UN Charter. Zelensky demanded action, not just words. The world must pressure Russia to end this war. Negotiations alone would not suffice. Many supported Ukraine, but how to compel Russia remained contentious. Some argued for increased sanctions and military aid, while others cautioned against escalating the conflict. The answer held the key to peace in Ukraine. At the heart of Zelensky's appeal was a concrete proposal, a peace formula designed to chart a path out of the current crisis. This formula, he explained, hinged on several key elements. First and foremost was the complete withdrawal of Russian forces from Ukrainian territory, a demand that echoed the calls of many Western nations. This withdrawal, Zelensky argued, was non-negotiable, a fundamental prerequisite for any meaningful peace talks. Next on Zelensky's list was the issue of reparations. Russia, he asserted, must be held accountable for the immense destruction wrought upon Ukraine. Zelensky demanded that those responsible for war crimes be brought to justice, sending a clear message that such atrocities would not be tolerated. Finally, Zelensky's peace formula included provisions for ensuring Ukraine's security in the long term. Ukraine would not be bullied into submission. Russia's response to Zelensky's plea was swift and unambiguous. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov issued a stark warning. Forcing Russia into peace, he declared, would be a fatal mistake. Peace, Peskov asserted, could only be achieved on Russia's terms. These terms, he elaborated, were rooted in Russia's need for security. Any attempt to impose a settlement that failed to address Russia's security concerns, Peskov warned, was doomed to fail. He reiterated Russia's stance on the conflict, calling it a special military operation. This narrative was disputed by Ukraine and its Western allies, who viewed Russia's actions as unprovoked aggression. Peskov's warning about the perils of forcing peace upon Russia was not to be taken lightly. He argued that such an approach, driven by a desire to punish and humiliate Russia, would only serve to exacerbate existing tensions and undermine the prospects for a lasting solution. Instead of fostering reconciliation, it would breed resentment and instability, potentially setting the stage for future conflicts. Any peace agreement, he insisted, must be reached through dialogue and mutual respect, not through coercion or threats. He called on the international community to engage in constructive dialogue with Russia, rather than resorting to isolation and pressure tactics. Peskov's words, while clearly self-serving in many respects, contained a kernel of truth. A peace agreement imposed upon a defeated and humiliated Russia would be unlikely to endure. To achieve a lasting peace, Russia's grievances, however misguided or exaggerated, would need to be addressed in some way. Section 5. Security concerns, a Russian perspective. Central to Russia's position on the conflict was the issue of NATO expansion, a long-standing grievance that had fueled tensions between Russia and the West for decades. Russia viewed NATO's eastward expansion as a direct threat to its security, a move designed to encircle and contain Russia's influence in its own backyard. The prospect of Ukraine joining NATO was particularly alarming to Russia. Ukraine, with its long shared border with Russia and its historical ties to Moscow, was seen as a buffer state of vital strategic importance. Allowing Ukraine to join NATO, from Russia's perspective, would be akin to stationing NATO troops on Russia's doorstep, an unacceptable security risk that Russia was willing to use force to prevent. To understand Russia's actions, one had to understand this historical context, this deep-seated fear of being surrounded and threatened. Section 6. The nuclear shadow. Looming over the conflict in Ukraine was the specter of nuclear war, a chilling possibility that sent shivers down the spines of world leaders. Following a meeting of Russia's Security Council, President Putin delivered a chilling message to the world. Russia, he declared, reserved the right to use nuclear weapons if its territory or its allies were attacked using conventional weapons. Putin's words sent shockwaves through the international community. While Russia, like other nuclear-armed states, had always maintained a policy of nuclear deterrence, Putin's explicit threat to use nuclear weapons in the context of the Ukraine conflict was deeply unsettling. It raised the stakes of the conflict to an unprecedented level, introducing the terrifying possibility of a nuclear confrontation between Russia and the West. Western leaders were quick to condemn Putin's nuclear saber-rattling, calling it reckless and irresponsible. Section 7. Putin's red lines. Putin's nuclear threats, while alarming, were not without conditions. He outlined specific scenarios in which Russia might resort to using its nuclear arsenal. One such scenario involved the detection of a massive launch of missiles, aircraft, or drones targeting Russia or its close ally, Belarus. This launch-on-warning scenario reflected Russia's deep-seated fear of a surprise attack, a fear rooted in its history of being invaded from the West. Another scenario outlined by Putin involved aggression against Russia using conventional weapons that threatened the very existence of the Russian state. This somewhat vague condition left considerable room for interpretation, raising concerns about the potential for miscalculation or escalation. Putin's conditions for using nuclear weapons, while seemingly specific, were ultimately subjective and open-ended. Section 8. A looming nuclear threat. President Zelensky, facing the daunting prospect of a Russian nuclear attack, issued his own stark warning to the world. He expressed grave concerns over Russia's occupation of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, Europe's largest, and its alleged plans to disrupt power to Ukraine's other nuclear facilities. Such actions, Zelensky warned, could have catastrophic consequences, potentially leading to a nuclear disaster with far-reaching implications. The situation at Zaporizhzhia had been a source of international concern for months. The potential for a nuclear accident, whether intentional or accidental, loomed large, adding another layer of complexity and risk to an already volatile situation. What began as a conventional war had escalated into a multifaceted crisis, encompassing not only military confrontations but also energy blackmail, nuclear brinkmanship, and the threat of environmental catastrophe. Section 9. The risk of escalation. As the war in Ukraine raged on, the risk of escalation cast a long shadow over the region. The potential for miscalculation or unintended consequences was high, as both sides engaged in increasingly risky maneuvers, testing each other's resolve and pushing the boundaries of acceptable behavior. The provision of increasingly sophisticated weaponry to Ukraine by Western powers, while intended to bolster Ukraine's defenses, also carried the risk of provoking a Russian escalation. Russia had repeatedly warned that it considered such arms shipments to be acts of aggression, raising fears that Russia might respond by targeting supply lines or even launching attacks on NATO territory. The growing involvement of foreign fighters and mercenaries on both sides of the conflict added another layer of volatility. Section 10. The Battleground in eastern Ukraine. While the world grappled with the geopolitical implications of the conflict and the terrifying possibility of nuclear war, the fighting on the ground in Ukraine continued unabated. Despite facing fierce resistance from Ukrainian forces and mounting international pressure, Russia had made incremental gains in eastern Ukraine, slowly but surely expanding its control over the Donbas region. Russian forces, backed by heavy artillery and air power, had intensified their offensive in the Donetsk region, capturing the villages of Hostra and Hryhorivka, and laying siege to the strategically important town of Vuhledar. The fighting in these areas was particularly brutal, with both sides suffering heavy casualties in a grinding war of attrition. Ukrainian officials, however, remained defiant, vowing to defend every inch of their territory and inflict maximum casualties on the invading Russian forces. Section 11. A Glimmer of Hope. Amidst the darkness and despair, a faint glimmer of hope emerged. Despite the Kremlin's tough talk and the ongoing fighting on the ground, there were hints that Russia might be open to negotiations, albeit on its own terms. Back-channel talks between Russian and Ukrainian officials had reportedly resumed, raising the possibility of a negotiated settlement, however unlikely it might seem at present. The road to peace, however, remained fraught with obstacles. Deep mistrust and animosity between the two sides, coupled with their diametrically opposed visions for Ukraine's future, made finding common ground an arduous task. Nevertheless, the very fact that talks were taking place, however tentatively, offered a glimmer of hope in an otherwise bleak landscape. The international community had a crucial role to play in facilitating dialogue, providing security guarantees, and ultimately creating the conditions for a just and lasting peace.
So hit that subscribe button, ring the bell for notifications, and let's turn the page on a new adventure together. Get ready to experience books like never before, only on VBook 360. Like, comment, and share to support the channel and keep the video magic alive. Thank you for stopping by. And remember, every video has a story, and every story deserves to be shared. See you in the next video.